Welcome to Left, Right, Center, where we are covering Colorado politics first on CBS News Colorado. I'm political specialist Sean Boyd. Joining me, our analysts, Republican Dick Wadhams, Democrat Mike Dino. Denver mayoral candidates Kelly Brough and Mike Johnston say they know the city has a lot of work to do on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they answered some tough questions about all three in a forum I moderated this past week. Both candidates say the high cost of housing is changing the makeup of neighborhoods like Northside and Five Points. And they had some specific ideas for increasing affordable housing.
For leasing. This is pretty common, and we really don't engage much in it at all here. The example here would be, as mayor, you might say, I'd like to lease 3,000, rent 3,000 units for 3 years. In essence, what you're starting to do is buy down some of the price of that rent. You also lock it in for 3 years. Most importantly, what you do is you get the phone call before someone's evicted, so you can actually help ensure you're keeping them housed.
I would, as mayor, build 25,000 permanently affordable units over the next 8 years. That means if you are making $40,000 a year, you can live in one of these units as a first-year teacher, and you are guaranteed that your rent never goes up over $1,000 a month if you make $40,000 a year. Your rent doesn't go up unless your income goes up, which means you don't have to worry each month that you're going to be pushed out. And more importantly, that unit is deed restricted to stay affordable forever. So you don't have to worry if some new landlord comes and buys the building, that they can say, oh, sorry, new owner in town, we're jacking up the rent $300 a month.
So Johnston says he would use money from Proposition 123, the affordable housing ballot measure that he led passage of. Kelly's kind of raining on his parade, saying, nah, the money's not going to be there. I'm hearing the money's not. I don't know where she gets that from, but it's a not so subtle dig. Mike?
Well, and I think we saw that in this debate or forum, as they like to call them. I think Kelly wanted to say, hey, I'm going to be the truth teller. Right. And, you know, Mike wants to be the visionary and the courageous, visionary. And I think they're trying to begin to define that. I mean, it's not terribly edgy. But the thing about housing here is I think the whole thing's going to change because we got our assessments yesterday. Yeah. Mine went up 175,000. Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, affordability is not getting any closer.
No, it is scary. Kelly also talked about how Denver's permitting process is not where it needs to be to even qualify for this Proposition 123 money, which is true. But Mike's like, yeah, and I'll fix it, right? And she's like, well, that's going to take some time.
Yeah, I thought that was a mistake on her part, Sean. I don't think it was a horrible mistake. It's not going to do long-term damage. But when she basically concedes that Denver is very inefficient and takes way too long on permitting, and she's a candidate for mayor, and she kind of concedes that, I don't think she meant that, but that's how it came across. And she's got to be careful about that stuff. And in terms of 123, I think Mike's right. I think this is an area where Mike Johnston actually comes across as more of a visionary, and I've already been there, and I'm doing something about it. And so I thought that exchange, he probably won that.
Right, but it's probably why she is going after him on this,
Well, he notched a victory last, election, and it is something that's a big part of his platform. Right. So you want to try to undermine it.
All right. Well, with 16 candidates in the general election, it was difficult to get to know any of them very well. And Brough and Johnston have very different backgrounds. Since this forum was at CU Denver, the candidates talked a little bit about their own college experiences.
Yeah, so my undergraduate is from Montana State. Going to college was a challenge for me. I had to figure out how to pay for it myself, like many kids probably today are facing, meaning I worked nights and weekends to get myself through college and my undergrad. I did it by working in the school a lot of work study. Probably the most memorable things for me were I served food in the cafeteria every single meal. And then I worked in the photography office where I actually was supposed to cut the slides. Don't tell them, but I think I screwed up on some of the students' art projects, and I feel so bad because I was really not very well trained for it. That said, every single minute of my college experience was working.
I had the opportunity to go to Yale for college, and I chose that university because it was in the middle of a very struggling city that had real challenges. And so I spent most of my college years working in a public housing project behind my dorm, which is called Church Street South. And I spent that time mentoring teenage boys who, after school, I would come and do after school and supports and tried to help them in all the ways we could get their lives together and on path. And I realized the most powerful forces in my life were teachers, and I thought the most powerful impact I could make on the next generation of young people was being a teacher. So that was what inspired me to start my career as a teacher. My first job was in Greenville, Mississippi, in what was then one of the poorest counties in America.
So who'd have thought graduating from Yale would hurt a person's chances of getting a job? But you know, when you're going for mayor in a progressive city like Denver, this isn't exactly a selling point for the far left. But Dick, I really thought he did a pretty good job of bringing this back to, you know, when I went to Yale, I worked with these, you know, underprivileged youth in this public housing project, and then I went and worked in the poorest county in the country as a teacher, right?
Yeah, I thought Mike did fine on that. Kelly has a compelling personal story. I think both of these candidates do themselves very proud in terms of what they've done in their lives. So I don't think that's even a discussion. I was offended this week when there was a news story that somehow Kelly is responsible for how the Denver Chamber of Commerce performed during the massacre, the Sand Creek massacre, and also that Mike should be held accountable for something that happened 80 or 90 years ago at that fraternity or whatever it was at Yale. Can we get off this stuff? I mean, why is there this element in politics that wants to find racism behind every corner? I just think it's unfair to candidates.
Well, you got to watch what club you belong to in high school anymore.
Really?
Right? Yeah. You know, Mike Bruff's background, raised by a single mom on welfare, which she has played up a lot, is a story that really, I think, resonates with Denver voters. But you know, it is her role as CEO of the Denver Chamber that, I think she has trouble with sometimes with Denver voters. I mean, the Chamber was against things like paid leave.
Well, yeah, and I think Kelly in her role, I mean, she had some discomfort at times at the Chamber because she is a tried and true Democrat. What's interesting about this race, it is the first race where we've had two Anglo candidates since 1975. That was the year I got my paper route with the Rocky Mountain News at age 9. And so 40% of our voters and almost 40% of the people, of the candidates who ran were candidates of color who got votes, right, and voters of color. And so that's you know, I think the college degree thing, that checks the box. I mean, voters want to just make sure you got it. I think what's more interesting is particularly for voters of color is how are they going to really relate to two candidates that are white? I mean, because we haven't had this in over 48 years, and half the voters weren't even born at that time. And so I don't know how candidates are going to take advantage of that. They want to show their street cred. But you know, the bottom line is they are two white people running for this seat that we haven't seen in a while. And
you know what's interesting too, Sean, is that both candidates have gotten very significant endorsements from the minority community in terms of Wellington Webb and Federico Pena.
Yeah.
They split their endorsements, so neither one of them have really been able to lock that down in this.
Right, and which is why, you know, I did probe this, you know,
yeah,
this
it was
whole
good.
question of diversity, equity, and inclusion around so many issues. Well, Bruff and Johnston are both largely mainstream centrist Democrats, which makes it more difficult to discern where they differ on issues. So I straight up asked them where they most disagree with their opponent.
I want Prop 123 to have the money so we can get the job done. I think for me, what I disagree, I respect the forecasters at the state who said it may not be there, and so I think that's just hard for me.
Maybe probably the most salient one for me is around homelessness and our approach to homelessness. I think my feeling has been you got to really focus on providing people access to housing first and to wraparound services that go there. I don't think the solution is to arrest people who are homeless, which I think has been part of Kelly's proposal.
You know, usually candidates do fine on their own, drawing out the differences and attacking each other's positions, especially at this point in the campaign. Not these two, though. Why? And I assume the PACs won't hesitate to go negative. So what kind of ads can we expect and when?
Well, certainly, I think we've talked about Kelly's role at the chamber, and there's plenty of things that somebody could, particularly the independent PAC, could get out of that, and arresting homeless folks. Will get an edge in some way for Johnston, and certainly in Kelly's situation. I mean, looking at him with a lack of administrative and executive experience, not having that, and do we really need a visionary now, or do we need somebody that's going to manage the office? So those are some contrasts, and I think we're going to start seeing that next week. I mean, we're going to be 5 weeks out, 2 weeks from ballots dropping. That's really when the runoff used to be 5 weeks. It starts next week.
It's interesting that Johnston brings up this Kelly wants to arrest, and she has said, look, if they're not going to get off the sidewalk and that's the only choice we've got, then that's what we're going to do. I wonder if that resonates with voters, too. I mean, they did pick these two for a reason.
I think it does resonate, and I think a tolerance level has been reached in Denver by a lot of voters. They're tired of it, and I think it's also seeping in that there's a certain element of the homeless. So yes, we all want to help, and that we need to help, and there should be aggressive policies to do that. But there's also an element that are threatening on the street, and they don't want to get off the street, and they're going to resist getting off the street. And I think Kelly might be onto something there. I think voters might like that.
Right. It all depends on how many of the far left turn out and where they go. Lisa Calderon still has not endorsed in this.
And we saw, almost half voted in the last, over half voted in the last 2 days of the general election. And so that's a turnout game. And as we saw, some of the most liberal parts of the voters turned out in those last 2 days.
Right. As you say, it's all about inches. Right?
That's right.
Up next, the political fallout from the rise in skyrocketing property taxes. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Left, Right, Center. County assessors across the state are warning of sharp spikes in property values, saying our taxes could go up by as much as 50%. Of 9 metro area counties, Douglas saw the largest median residential increase at 47%. The lowest was 33% in Denver. State lawmakers are promising some relief, and there are ballot measures in the works, but it's unclear if either will happen before the new property taxes kick in January.
We've never seen, I think we would all agree, something this historic or unprecedented.
County assessors are sounding an alarm about what is shaping up to be the biggest tax increase in Colorado history, upwards of $3.5 billion based on new property valuations.
This is coming, and it's coming quickly, and people are about to get their new assessments that show that huge increase.
An increase Michael Fields with Advance Colorado has been warning about since voters repealed the Gallagher Amendment in 2020, which had essentially capped property tax increases. In anticipation of a big spike, the legislature, at the governor's urging, passed a bill last year providing $1 billion in relief. But the increase is beyond what anyone expected, in large part because assessments were done in June of 2022 when home prices were at a high point.
Every 2 years, your house gets reassessed. So this is going to happen again and again and again until our property taxes are as high as any state in the nation.
Fields is working on a ballot measure to permanently cap property tax increases at 3%.
This is something that we wish the legislature would take on. And if they want to make it a 5 or 6% cap, that's fine. What we can't have is 40 or 50% that we have right now.
It might sound good at first blush, but just a flat cap on property tax leads to tons of unintended consequences.
Senator Chris Hansen says any solution needs to balance helping homeowners without hurting schools and local governments that rely on property taxes.
And we're going to do our best to really look hard at the data and come up with a package that balances those two imperatives.
We care about education and fire and all these different entities that are funded by property taxes, but it has to be a reasonable amount of increase each year.
So I don't think any of these ballot measures are going to make this year's ballot. And again, these new property taxes kick in January. So this is really up to the legislature. At this point, they've set aside about $200 million in the budget, anticipating that these higher values were going to come out. But Ken, we're talking about $3.5 billion.
Right.
So that's a drop in the bucket.
Yes. You know, this will probably be fought out ultimately over the next 2 years, Sean, and they'll pass. I mean, I know Governor Polis announced his plan today that may or may not be approved before the session is over. we're probably looking at a special session to really deal with this. I don't see how they can do it before they're going to adjourn. But I do think it strikes terror in the hearts of Democrats, as we just saw with Chris Hansen, when you start talking about capping property taxes. That's what it ought to be. We ought to have a cap on these things and make decisions on priorities. And I'm sure that scares them to death.
Yeah, what Michael Fields points out is we get like it has to come up each year,
Yes,
and that
sure.
local governments need more money. But do they need 50% more money, or do they need 5-6% more money is what we're really talking about here. Field says the only way he's not going to bring a ballot measure is if the legislature enacts a cap. I don't see that happening.
No, I don't see it happening. Dick and I talked before this. Maybe there'll be a special session if they really want to dig into it more on something like that. We had the cap, as you pointed out, with the Gallagher Amendment. Essentially was that. But I think that when people look at the legislation, it's a drop in the bucket in a lot of sense. So they're going to have to prioritize who gets it. My parents are on a fixed income. Theirs went up over $225,000, and so I think we're going to see people like that gain the benefit of some of the state money, and they'll have to sort that out as how they're going to prioritize it.
So Bell Policy Center is also going to bring some competing measures in the event that Fields passes and there is a cap, and their measures would essentially backfill this lost revenue to local government with Tabor refunds.
Oh, sure.
Right. So if Fields tried a similar measure to the one that he's bringing now with a cap, I think what played into it failing in large part was the legislature created some confusion around that one. So where do you see these ballot measures going? Because I think we are going to see something make the ballot next year.
I think both will end up putting something on the ballot, and they'll be competing on the ballot. So, and then, of course, the law says whoever gets the most votes, if they both pass, which they could, the one with the most votes is the one that's law. So we'll see. Or they'll both go down in flames because the voters might be confused.
Well, that could be, too.
I think they pass. I mean, getting that assessment yesterday was sobering. I mean, that in itself is a great campaign message, and people aren't going to forget that. I'm not going to forget what I saw in my assessment. I know my folks won't, and others are going to. They'll remember that for a long time.
I got to think this is going to come up in the mayoral race as well. Given when Gallagher was repealed, there was this promise. We are going to come up with a long-term fix. We understand that this isn't going to work. There isn't a long-term fix there.
Remember, Sean, too, one of the reasons why Gallagher was repealed is that a huge increase was barreling down towards property, small businesses.
Commercial.
And if it hadn't been repealed, they were going to get a huge increase and was going to drive a lot of people out of business. And I think that doesn't get mentioned in a lot of this discussion right now.
Right. There was a good reason for repealing it at that time. Well, thanks for joining us for this installment of Left, Right, Center. We will see you next week.